Welcome back, everyone, to the Greyhorn Pagans podcast. Thank you all for joining me once again. And for today, I have the pleasure of hosting Astral Meadow. I've been on her show before, the Astral Hour, talking mostly Tartaria and a whole lot of other tangents and rabbit holes. That was a fun one. So, like, right away, if you haven't checked that one out yet, please do after this one. Of course, you're here for me. Sorry. No, but and yeah, that was a fun show, and I'm happy I get to repay the favor and host you here as well. So, for those who may not be familiar with you or your work just yet, introduce yourself. What do you do? What are you about? What's your secret?
All right, I am Astral Meadow. I am a mixed media artist, a homeopath, a podcaster. I work in the Akashic Records. I do readings and teach people how to access the Akashic Records. I am an astrologer and a tarot and oracle reader, among many other things, but that's what I choose to focus on usually for my public persona. So yeah, that's kind of what my work evolves around.
Awesome. So just everything spiritual, really, just
and healing.
Yeah,
I do a lot of holistic healing.
Yeah. I actually just the other day, a few weeks ago, hosted someone that was on your show as well, Scarlett Astral Reiki girl.
Okay, yeah,
Scarlett,
yeah, she's actually local to my area. So
oh, really? Oh,
met
cool.
her in person.
Hey. Yeah, no, that was a good show. And yeah, for today we have picked the topic of, well, you mentioned it briefly, the Akashic Records, something that's in 4 or 5 years of doing this show now, I haven't done a solo show about yet. Like it's come up on just multiple platforms with multiple people. I know that with the Bush Whisperer Shaman, it comes up just pretty much always, of course, yeah. But and it's something that just it's a topic that just keeps fascinating me, but I never seem to get a real grip on what the Akashic Records actually are, because there are so many people talking about it, and some who are more knowledgeable than others, and others who are just doing it for clicks. So since you work a lot with or in the Akashic Records, what are they? To my knowledge, to my best knowledge, it's like a library of some kind, but where everything is written down, however that works. See, this is why I wanted you on.
Right. Yeah, well, they're really dynamic, so it's different cultures call them different things. So some people do refer to them as an archive or a library. And that kind of works. They do store information, and I've asked them about this. Do you like being called like the Book of Life or a library? And they always say that as long as your interpretation of that is a living and breathing library, like when that is not stagnant and has this fixed structure, then they are okay with that description. But to really define them, I like to really pinpoint that they're an experiential, multi-dimensional field of wisdom and unconditional love. And that's where some people kind of forget to include that. So we're not just going in there and information mining and pulling out a lot of, concrete, reified, structured information. I mean, you can absolutely go ask about history and all sorts of things, but it's experiential. So it's, we're engaging with it directly. We are feeling its energy when we are in there. And so it's different than a library where you go and find one specific book and you read about it just with your logical mind. So they can speak to us through that logical language, but sometimes they speak through impressions and sensations and feelings, or they might give you imagery. So they actually contain the energetic memory of every soul, every moment, and they form a living consciousness that exists both within and beyond time. it's really hard to define them because they are so broad and they are interconnected with all things. But the living aspect is what I like to kind of focus on, and they have instructed me that they prefer to be viewed through a living type of lens. So, and they are relational, and so the more time you spend in there, the deeper your relationship with them sort of grows, and you get more comfortable with receiving insights through different kind of sensory experiences. So some people who are more clairvoyant naturally, they go in and they're like, I can see and hear and smell, and they're writing. And then a lot of people, I would say 80% of people, when they're in there, it's more of a claircognizance. It's like just knowing, like you just feel like, okay, I asked this question and I knew this was the answer, but I can't tell you how I knew. So because they're experiential, people will have different experiences inside the records. So some people go in through meditation. It might look a little bit more like that mystical meditation where you're really like able to kind of almost touch, like reach out and interact. And I do find that when my eyes are closed and I'm in that state, it's like I can see the room more, right? But a lot of times, like when I'm doing readings for other people, my eyes are open, I'm with them, and it's almost coming to me as downloads. And everybody's records, we all have our own unique records within the great records. So if I go into your records, you're going to have different teachers, you're going to have different guides that come forward, you're going to be having your own personal experience. So my guide for the day might be totally different than your guide for the day. And I've also found people that practice certain religions, although the records are not dogmatic, if let's say you are a Christian in your records, the guides tend to meet you where you are in your own spiritual beliefs. So a lot of the Christian people will have like angels and saints and things like that show up as their guides. Where me, somebody who's very open-minded to all cultures, I've learned so much about these different realms, and I have guides from all different types of belief systems, and I'll have to actually Google sometimes and be like, who is Yama? And I love that, but it's because I am so open to receiving guidance from pretty much anyone that has my highest interest. And so yeah, there is your own personal records, and then there's like the records, right? And then we have records for all things and animals and plants, so you can go into specific records too.
Wow. Okay. That is a lot to process right away.
Yeah, it took me a while to try to condense that, actually.
Yeah, I can imagine if this is the condensed version. Wow. So they are a living being, or they prefer to be seen as a living being. So
there's multiple entities that exist within the records. So they're living in the fact that they have beings that exist within them that are alive, if that makes sense.
I'm trying to make it make sense in my head. A little too logical for this, perhaps. So, okay, but then the library itself, is it a, I guess very simply put, is it a place? Is it a consciousness of some kind?
I think consciousness is a good way to describe it. And as far as place goes, the records exist everywhere. So throughout all time and space. So there's not a particular place that we go to find them. But there are some cultures that will go into the records, which I kind of see it as like little portals. So in Barbara Handcloud's book, Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, she talks about how the records are in all dimensions, but there is a specific place within the earth, the iron core crystal center of the earth. And that is sort of like the storage place where Earth's Akashic records are. So when she connects with the records, she projects her consciousness into the center of the earth. And I really loved her perspective on this. And when I was teaching a class once, they were like, could you bring this up to your students? Because they wanted me to then relate it to every human being has the birthright to access the records, because all of us have iron within our blood, and that actually resonates with the iron core crystal center of the earth. Now, this is so far out, but it it's a connection that I've been able to make. And so there are a lot of cultures that will sort of enter the records their own way. Some do it through mystical prayers or meditations. Maybe they're doing like shamanic journeys. And I think all of us, because it's our birthright, we kind of are slipping in and out of the records at times, but we're doing it more unconsciously. So everyone's kind of had those moments where, you have this question and then you get this epiphany and you're like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, I know this to be true, even though it might not be logical. And, it's a lot of us, when we have those moments, we're kind of seeking like, what was it? Like, what time of day was it? Like, what was I doing? Like, how did I access that body of wisdom? And so for my personal practice, I do work with a sacred prayer that just kind of helps create the sacred space. It sets the intention, and I know that I'm in there instead of like questioning, like, is this my intuition? Is this the records? I'm not sure. So creating that sacred space is really important for me to kind of ground my practice. And I do like to use the visualization of rooting into the earth as just kind of a way to feel more stable as I'm adventuring out, sometimes far into the cosmos. But yeah, it's living because the information, is always evolving. It's always being upgraded. There's living entities that exist within our records, which we call the masters, teachers, and loved ones. And so depending on what your question is, you might have a different being show up to kind of hold space for you in that moment that holds the resonance of that answer. So, especially with teachers, because they're like lesson specific energies.
Yeah.
So they could be like an ascended master, or they could be something like temperance, like learning temperance, who was my guide for a couple days. Like every time I would say, who's my guide for the day? They're like temperance. And that was a lesson specific kind of archetypal energy that was my teacher for that moment. But sometimes it might be Kuan Yin, or so, someone that was like maybe a master when they were on Earth. So teachers can be people that were incarnated at some point. They don't have to be. Like temperance is archetypal, so it's not necessarily someone that had embodiment at some point. So teachers can be very dynamic in that way, where some of the other guides, they show up at different times depending on your question. So
are those guides and teachers, like, are they always there, or are they, well, let's say, manifested when needed?
So the masters, we have masters, teachers, loved ones. The masters, they actually have been with you since your soul's inception. And so they actually are always there. They've been with us since we took our very first breath, and they've kind of just been operating behind the scenes, and just it's a very natural relationship with them, and they're kind of like your best friends that you don't ever have to worry about being alone, because they are there. And the masters actually help work with us to figure out who is the proper teacher for that moment. So it might be one of my masters that's like, actually temperance is the lesson, so I'm gonna help be the conduit to get her in contact with temperance. So, and then when you learn that lesson, say when I finally figured it out and kind of integrated temperance, it doesn't mean in 10 years I won't need to revisit that lesson. But once we've kind of mastered it for that moment, it kind of does sort of fade out. It becomes less central to the present moment. So teachers are more lesson specific, and we can kind of evolve and not really need them so much. Loved ones, these are people that were incarnated, that we did have some kind of relationship with at some point, that have now crossed over. And so, they're always, I think our loved ones are always with us to a certain extent, like in our biofield. But there's going to be certain points or questions that they are the best ones to answer it, especially if you're grieving or you're vulnerable or you're in a sensitive space. Instead of, sending you some random teacher archetype, it might be your great grandmother that actually has that capacity to not only give you information, but to hold you. And so this is where the unconditional love aspect comes in, because it is when we're in the records, we are very much aware of how deeply honored and loved we are in that space. And so it's not all about what can we learn there. it's almost about how can we remember ourselves in our wholeness, like, and like these things we're worried about, these questions, they're really almost like we're not aware. We're seeing ourselves distortedly in those moments. Then we go in the records and we're like, oh, we see it through that bird's eye view, and we're like, oh, it's interconnected, and I am strong, and this is hard. You know, the unconditional love aspect is just so beautiful because this reality can be so harsh sometimes, and I think sometimes people think, oh, the records are so sacred and I have to only go in when I have that one question that I waited 10 years to ask. And you can treat it, you know, very, I guess, ritualistically if you want, but I go in there for all sorts of stuff. You know, I open my records sometimes when I make art, and paint with them. I write poetry with them. If I'm like sore or not feeling well, I'll have them kind of give me like a yoga sequence to do that my body would really appreciate. And so you can just go in and just be in that field and just feel that love. And it's almost like move with the information and like embody it instead of it being this like literal, these words that come through. So sometimes with art, it's shapes, it's colors, it's like add more water, you know, and I really just embrace the flow of it. And so it can be, you know, I guess more playful and more fun experiences. It doesn't always have to be like, what is my purpose for incarnating? That's, you know, this very like big, which I love asking those questions too, but sometimes it's just like, I'm a little down today. What could I do to feel joy in this moment?
Yeah.
And then it's, you know, it's something maybe that's so simple that I'm just overanalyzed, and they're just like, why don't you go outside and smell a flower?
Yeah, just go outside,
You know,
touch grass.
exactly. Like sometimes the guidance is really simple and like very logical.
Speaking of guides, got my kitty cat here, of course, who is trying to make himself comfortable on the desk. Well, he is almost the size of my desk. I do love you too. But that's interesting that you can go in there with just all kinds of questions, because I do believe that is I don't want to call it a trap, but something that a lot of people like do believe, that when you ask the gods or ask the records or something, that like it has to be this profound question, like almost indeed like, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of my incarnation? What does the future have in store for me? Who will I become? And then I think it's so fascinating that you're just saying like, yeah, sometimes I'm just a little under the weather, and I'm like, hey, like, I'm not feeling the greatest. What can I do? And it's like, you're kind of treating it as, I knew that was going to happen. Thank you, Tim. So it's more of a, this is going to sound quite odd perhaps, but more of like a, just a search engine of some kind, but one that like isn't driven by AI and gives you actual answers.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. With full of friends and loved ones and insight, and there's a lot of healing too. I mean, sometimes I'll open the records and just kind of lay down and, talk through like I'm having inflammation or I'm having some anxiousness, and I'm just in the field, and it feels a little bit like having like a Reiki session, because it's like this light, this consciousness is just moving through me, and I am tuned into it in that moment, and I'm just allowing healing to occur. And I mean, I've just had some profound moments just kind of experimenting with them. And you read books and they're like, and you use the records like this and this and this, and there's bullet points, and it's like, okay, that's great. And I'm like, well, what else could I do?
Yeah.
Because I'm such a curious person, and I've been in relationship with my records for so long now. So sometimes I will ask them like, what's the best question to ask? And what is the best way that I can work with you all today? And because of some of the responses, I've just expanded in a lot of ways and not let, certain people limit my experience within them. It's like, oh, well, that's a superficial question. I mean, like, they helped me pick out the sweater today. Like it doesn't, and that to them, they're like, there is nothing that's more or less sacred. I mean, it's just, it's just life. Like, they're not judging us.
Yeah.
They're not sitting up on this high throne like, oh, well, that was a stupid question. And also, we don't have to listen to them. They're not worried about if we take their advice. I mean, sometimes I'll go in and ask advice and just kind of forget. My kids distract me, and then my day goes on, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I totally forgot to stretch. And then I'll have a neck crick for 2 weeks. And I'm like, and then I'll go back in, and they're never like, oh, well, we told you that if you didn't stretch your neck. Instead, they're like, okay, let's apply some of this balm to it. Let's move it around. You're going to need to be patient, maybe add some red light, And at that point, now it needs a lot of adjustments, right? If I would have just taken their advice and just, given myself 5 minutes before starting my day, I really do feel I probably would have prevented that.
Yeah.
But I love that they meet us with grace and love, and they're just like, okay, well, now let's look at it from this present moment. You have neck pain.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's important for people to know too. And it kind of takes that fear away of like, oh, I have to do what they said, and they usually don't give you absolutes anyways. It's usually suggestions only if you're asking for them. And so we have the free will at all points to say, well, I think I'm going to wear the blue sweater,
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't, and maybe it doesn't really change the course of events. Maybe I would have felt more confident in the other one, right? But then I don't know because I didn't do it. So, not all of their information is so profound. Some of it's gentle and it's just realistic, and it's, maybe something you would ask a friend. But
okay.
I view my records kind of as my friends.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting though. That's fascinating. So have you, in your studies and with teaching others, have you experienced that with others, that they're like afraid of being judged? Because, a lot of, well, let's say that, the new generation of, of spirituality, like a lot do come from let's say a more dogmatic background where judgment is basically the basis of the religion. Do this or you will be judged.
Right.
Like, have you seen that at all with people, that, the fear of being judged by such what sounds as a beautiful being, beautiful entity as the Akashic Records?
I think that there are some people that just simply feel unworthy of having sacred experiences. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's a particular dogma that puts us in that space. Some people, I think, just lack the confidence. And then I do think there is some underlying fear if you've been taught that anything outside of, a particular scripture or something like that is to be feared. And so even though they're in the field and they feel loved, maybe they're like, they treat it the way that they might pray, which is fine. I mean, you can come into the records with any mentality, but, I do encourage my students with these 3 guide points is just fear not, resist not. Trying to think of what that third one is right now, but just to approach it with this sort of openness, and if you're afraid, let's say I ask a question, but I'm actually terrified of knowing the answer, because maybe I'm asking about a relationship and intuitively I actually have the feeling that relationship is probably done, right?
Yeah.
So if I come into that and I have fear up, what it does is it kind of puts this protective wall around, and the answers might be more vague. They might be more gentle of instead of telling you exactly, they might be like, well, what is it that you're afraid of? And so they'll take you through this whole conversation around the fear itself, instead of telling you you're afraid because this relationship means a lot to you, and you actually intuitively already know that it's at an end,
Yeah.
So, if you can go in without the fear, I feel like the answers, we can get deeper into our own kind of, I guess, unconscious material. If we're open to that, we can go really deep. I've done a lot of shadow work with the records, but if we're afraid to know something, they will meet us there, and they're not going to take us somewhere that we're uncomfortable. And that's part of their love and grace. So it's kind of if we are showing resistance, then they're going to respond to that. And, you might get very boring answers in that moment, because they're they can sense that resistance of knowing that answer. You're not ready to know that answer. And so that's the cool thing about it, where, sometimes you might go to a medium and they're just they just say it, and it's oh, and that actually might bring out fear if a person's not ready. So I love the records, because they really do meet us where we are they know what we're ready for. And then we can work with them and be like, why am I feeling so much resistance to this? Like, what is this? And then we get all sorts of beautiful responses to help us kind of heal and mend things so that we can then meet that challenge head on with a lot of confidence and power instead of like just trembling and the uncertainty of, you know. And it feels like when I'm in the records, it's just like everything's all right. You know, like even things that I'm afraid of, as soon as I enter and ask that question, I'm like, oh, well, here I'm not scared of it. And it's like, I'm only scared of it when it's like that monkey mind is going off and trying to imagine 100 different, you know, ways that might fail. And instead, they're like,
we've all
actually,
been there.
Yeah, they're more encouraging in those moments.
Okay, I wasn't actually expecting that answer. Like when there's like resistance or fear, that it guides you through it. I mean, you know, of course, Germanic polytheism, just or Northern Europe in general, it's a little harsher here. So, you know, if you're fearful of something or scared of something, is like, you know, you're just it's different. Let's just say that it's harsher, but that's beautiful. Actually, I really wasn't expecting that answer. Like it guides you to where the fear comes from. Like I was more thinking if you go in there with you know, with a fear or with resistance, then it's not going to give you the answer that you're looking for. Maybe it's also like part personal projection, because that's totally what I would have done. It's like, you know, oh, I don't want to know the answer. Well, then you're not getting it because you're clearly afraid of it. So see you next time.
Yeah, they will definitely direct you. And, you know, they're responding to your question. So if they give you an answer and you just close the records and leave, then you might not get the deeper, you know, insight into it. It's, you know, I go in and I'm prying all around. I'm like, why am I trembling every time I think of this person? Like, what is going on here? Like, I want to know because I'm actually deeply invested in my own healing. And so even if I am a little afraid, I want to know, because something about knowing actually, it's like it releases the fear, because so much of it is just in my own mind. It's not reality, you know, it's not necessary. Like maybe a fear from my childhood was necessary then, but it's not anymore. And there's a lot of clearing and healing work that happens within the records. And it's just simply them saying, you know, like this isn't needed anymore. Like you don't have to hold on to this anymore. I mean, you can, we won't judge you, but and so I've been able to overcome things that just almost seemed impossible at points in my life with certain grief and trauma, and now it's like I'm able to remember some of that without it's not affecting me in a physical or in a mental way anymore. They're just stories. And so yeah, just for the healing aspect alone, you know, it's like definitely worth my time and investment. But the relationship itself is like one of the most valuable things that I have, you know. And I work with them all sorts of ways. Like even with my other work, you know, if I'm looking at my natal chart and I'm trying to understand something, I'm like, which planet do I need to focus on to figure this one out? Like what's going on out here? And I've been guided to look into like asteroids and other, you know, planetary bodies that I might have not considered, right? Because like there's thousands of them. So they also can help me even with some of my other work, you know, if people feel comfortable. Like I don't just do them with natal charts unless someone asks. But if they're asking about like the nodes and we're talking about past lives and things, you know, I can speculate looking at the chart logically. But then if they want, you know, we can open the records and be like, well, what actually is this past life and how is it affecting you and what did you learn and how has it empowered you, you know, up to this point, and where are you going, versus just, you know, making a generalized answer because they have like the South Node in Leo or something, like, oh, you were a king. Well, maybe, but what was your name? You know, because like we could get details, you know, I found all sorts of lifetimes and I like to keep going. I'm like, what was the time period? What was my name? Like, what culture was I from? Like, what did the landscape look like? So I don't know if that's because I just have such a big imagination and I'm a writer and I like to really like submerge myself into it, but I've been able to find all sorts of beautiful details and even locate the specific place that I lived, you know, for places that are still there, right? So
Wow. Okay. I mean, I would I would totally do the same thing. It's like, oh, you used to be that. Okay, tell me more. Like now, I want to know everything.
right. And as long as you keep asking questions, you're going to keep getting answers. So I have to
Awesome.
time myself sometimes because I'm like, I'll just be writing for like an hour and I'm like, wait, what time is it? It's just when you're there, time feels kind of irrelevant, and time is different. The way we perceive it in this third dimensional reality is different. And when we're there, it kind of feels like it's all happening simultaneously there. Like when I tune into a past life, that version of me sometimes is the guide for my present life. And I can have like direct contact with her. So it doesn't feel like in that moment, oh, she's dead and gone, and her, it's like, no, her energy is still there.
Yeah.
She still operates in some way that I'm able to access. And I think that's where it is. It feels more alive versus accessing this dead part of you. And then, you can access even parallel realities, which is something that I just tuned into the other day with a lifetime. And I asked, I was like, is this the past? They were like, well, kind of, but it's also parallel. But she's so old that it would technically be the past for you here, like if you're looking at it through a structured timeline, but she's still alive, but because she's thousands of years old. Yeah, it's past and parallel. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, but I go there. Like some people might go into the records and it's very present oriented, and it really is just, this is how you get the job. This is how you can help manifest the reality you want. This is how you heal. And, I guess when you spend years and years in there, you just get a little bit like, I start asking different types of questions.
Yeah.
So,
But with since the Akashic Records, it holds past, present, future. What we know from things like time travel, for example, like knowing the future isn't always such a good thing. And I mean, this also comes with the whole conversation of, is life predetermined, or is it like free will? Is it a little bit both, and etc. So, but I can imagine if the Akashic Records like holds future as well, future times, future tense, future you, perhaps, and next life, who knows? Like, isn't there, like, I would want to know, but then I also know, like at least personally, that somehow I messed that up, like being so focused on like, this is going to happen in the future that I somehow managed to steer myself away from it or something like, I do see, but I'm a little more cautious perhaps with that because I've seen things, heard things. But how do you deal with that within the records or through the records? Like if they hold future, how do you like prevent yourself from like either messing up or on the flip side, like doing nothing at all because, that's going to happen anyway. So why would I do anything?
right. But with the future, it is not so fixed like past, say. And I'm not sure if the past is fixed either, actually.
That's going into quantum mechanics. That's interesting.
Yeah, right. So I'm not saying there's not certain points in time that are fixed in the past, present, and future, like things that we were always gonna probably stumble on, but the way we react to it changes. So when they talk about the future, which I don't personally ask a lot about the future, but you can, they always speak in this language of potentials. Like there's a future potential here. Like if you did all of these things and we're in alignment, that is a potential. But then sometimes what I'll realize is like, I have this idea for the future and I ask about it and they'll start asking me questions. Like, why do you want, like, what is it about this? And then I'm like, actually, now that you say that, I don't know. That is like exactly what I want. So what they do is they actually help me sometimes with like intentions and goals and things and kind of narrowing it down and not having an expectation, but just what is it, the actual essence of what I'm trying to call in? What is that? And not saying, oh, I want it to be this and I want it to be this year and time. And it's like, I want to be healthy and happy. okay, well, let's work on the obstacles that's preventing that, because you could actually be that in this very moment, And so it's not so much about a date or something specific, and we have free will at all times. So future it's not concrete. I mean, so I always try to guide my clients, like be mindful of that if you're going to ask about the future, that they usually will not give you, a specific thing. Now, I have had them talk about certain transits, and they might say in this time of like when the planets are doing this, there's going to be more opportunities for expansion in that area. And they'll say that, but they will not say for sure, because you might make a total different choice that changes the course of events,
Yeah.
So, and other people are important, it's like we're in our records, but other people are making choices too that changes the structure of the future. So they do not ever talk in absolutes about time, specific things.
Okay.
So it's nice to keep that in mind so people don't get so hung up on, and that's the difference. We always tell people, like, if you want that, like, go to a medium, get your tarot cards out. There's other modalities that might be better, I guess, to kind of help you if that's what you're seeking. So, not everything. I mean, you can go to the records with whatever, but like yes or no questions aren't usually preferable. And get you a really boring response. Usually they want you to have that conversation with them. We want to build that relationship up. And so, if you have a yes or no, they're always like, well, get your pendulum out and ask that. like if you want something for certain that, you just have to wrap your mind around, then maybe use a different modality, which they are open to. Sometimes I'll go into my records and then I'll pull cards after, which I love doing this so much. And just yesterday, I asked who's my guide for the day, which I like to ask every day. And they said Vishnu. And I was like, well, that's very interesting. I do have a deck that has Vishnu in it, right? So as an oracle card. So I did pull that deck in, but I was using 5 different decks. And when I pulled who's the guide, I pulled Vishnu. And I was like, this is so cool. And I just like nerd out every time, like when it's the synchronicity hits, because I'm just like, okay, thanks records. Like you nailed that one. But sometimes it might be, they'll tell me this is the guide, and then that's like an archetypal energy that maybe this ascended master contains within its grand scheme. Like, because like an ascended master might have mastery over like 20 different themes. So it might just be like they're saying trust, and then this is just a guide that also teaches trust. So, it's not always like exact, but when it is like I eke out loud, and my husband's like, "What's wrong?"
Okay. Oh no. Okay. That's good to know. And that's kind of what I envision, like, timeline wise, etc. That it really depends on the choices that you make, what your future is going to be. Like, I do believe that there are multiple paths laid out for us, and that it really depends on the choices that you make, which path you travel. Then again, there are, of course, there are right paths and there are wrong paths, and I have taken, or let's say missed an exit here and there.
Detour.
Yeah. I like to take the scenic route. Sightseeing, be a little bit of a dimensional tourist, if you will.
Yeah.
Well, like for me personally, I always kind of, get the nudge, like, hey, this is not the right path. Like, if you have a future in mind that you want, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, then maybe like get back on the path that you were, because that's the one actually leading to that. Like the one you're on now, it's a path. It'll lead to somewhere, not the thing that you like actually want.
Right.
And that's also where free choice comes in, which is great, but also I hate having free choice sometimes. It's just, it's also a big responsibility as well. You cannot blame anyone else but yourself for the actions that you have made. I mean, good thing there's
evolving, you're growing through even making what you might consider in that moment the wrong choice. And the records like to sometimes use the analogy of like life's a dance. So they're like 2 steps back, cha cha cha, 1 step. like it's all a part of the dance. And like what seems like a detour, actually that lesson that you got that might have been a little harsher than it had to be was really important because it helped you like change course a little bit. And maybe your goals became more clearer because of that. You're like, well, it's definitely not that, whatever that was.
Yeah.
And so they don't really, ever make me feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. They're just like, well, you said your intention was this. So, there are easier ways to obtain this, with more grace and ease if that's what you're looking for. So that is where it's like that non-judgment, that they just meet you where you're at. And sometimes people, I think in some people, their whole life, they're in a circle and they just almost like don't progress at all. And their records are going to meet them there. They're not going to be like, stop repeating the same thing. Or like, they're not going to be like mean about it. They're just going to be like, okay, well, here's the pattern. And if you just keep messing up, they're going to keep meeting you there. Like that is the grace. That's the compassion, and they're not trying to control your destiny. They're just trying to be there for support when you need, which is our divine birthright to have that support in any moment. It's just that, a lot of people have forgotten that they have it there. A lot of people forget that they're multidimensional. A lot of people, that's the whole thing. When you come to Earth, you forget everything. And that's the part that sucks about it. So, but they are there to help you remember the things that are really vital for your growth, specifically in that moment that you're asking that question,
So even when stuck in a loop, they don't, well, like actively help you. They're just like, hey, this is the loop you're in. What are you gonna
they can't force you to make a decision. So, I don't know. That's hard for me because when I'm in the records, I feel like I'm constantly like upgrading my life. But there are some people that I feel like maybe it's with the trauma and stuff. Maybe they're not asking about healing. Maybe they're not looking to grow. They're just trying to maintain whatever piece it is that they find within that loop. And, and that's their, that's on them. And so they're not going to say you have to make this change. They're going to, depending on what you ask the question about, right? If you do ask, how can I grow? Then they will absolutely tell you, steps and things that you can take. But if you just come in and you're like, I'm sad, I need a little support, then they'll just keep giving you that support. I mean, because they're only going to give you information based off your questions. So a lot of people don't ask questions about growth, which feels bizarre to me because like that to me, like, what's the point? I love learning and growing, but some people, they are, I think, more stuck in certain lifetimes than others. So they're not necessarily going to evolve at the same speed as another person.
Yeah.
And I really love the idea, and my yoga teacher used to talk about like moksha, like, and he's like, some people take a donkey up the mountain and some people take the jet plane and some people, and it's like, but they're all getting up the mountain. It doesn't matter. You could go in a circle for 10 lifetimes at the bottom if you want, but like it's not up for us to judge, what people feel comfortable with as far as evolving, so.
That is true. I mean, it's a hard one sometimes. Like I personally know at least one or two people who have had bad experiences in the past, and I know how it is to be depressed, but like comfortable in your depression because it's what it's become predictable and all of that. At least the two that I know personally, one of them I have kids with, unfortunately. I mean, it's a lesson. It's been a lesson. Boy, it's been a lesson. But they have made it part of their identity. Like their trauma has become part of their identity.
Mm-hmm.
The struggle, the suffering, it's for some reason what now defines them, and they can't seem to move from it, like move, even though I know my baby mama, she had a chance. There was a chance quite recently actually for her to move on and break the cycle, but unfortunately she chose not to, and I still wonder why, because would have been good. Wouldn't it be good? Like our relationship or whatever we may have now would have been a lot better for it as well. And I, like I said, I know it's hard, the breaking of cycles. I'm trying to break many cycles myself too. It's the hardest job you'll ever do.
Right.
But like, I'm just wondering, and maybe it's just, the human part of me that, like just a bit of a boost. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, here's your chance.
Right. Yeah.
Perhaps you should take it, because, I mean, you're in this loop now, and I
Right.
mean, it's not the best.
Right.
Or, well, pure impartialness of the Akashic Records. That's where I kind of have this disconnect. Like, I get it, such a, well, high being, such a divine being, entity. There are consequences, of course, for meddling. But like, I'm just wondering, like, if those people, like, they do need a bit of that boost. So then just
Mm-hmm.
to present them with the option, I mean,
Or give
history.
you suggestions, on how to heal. So something that happened with me is I was kind of in a loop, and this was before I knew what homeopathy was, but they were like, "Oh, you're experiencing a miasm." And I was like, "I don't know what that means." But then I started digging into like, what is a miasm? And this is sort of a chronic pattern that exists, and it can actually come from the bloodline. I have this feeling that it might even carry over from past lives. It's a chronic pattern that until we address it, it will continually come up over and over again. And we'll basically respond, whether it's physically through physical symptoms or mental symptoms or whatever, the same way until that pattern is broken. And so when I started studying the miasm, which the records guided me to, that's what it was. Okay. So they didn't tell me, you have to do this one thing. They were like, you have a miasm, do some research into that, and that's where I was empowered in that moment that, oh, there's an answer to this. Like, but it's our free will to decide if we're going to take their advice or not. But then I started learning homeopathy, and miasm is kind of the underlining core of all chronic disease. And I was just like, what do you mean there's a whole field of information like based around these chronic patterns? But when you discover that, then there are remedies, that can help meet you there, that actually help break that pattern. And so the records are the ones that guided me to homeopathy, which heals us on all levels. So even the spiritual stuff, even the mental, the stuff. And I actually needed support on all levels. It wasn't just physical, it was like my whole being was struggling with a loop based on trauma that was passed down to me that was out of my control at that point. The trauma wasn't my fault. The healing was absolutely my responsibility. And so they did help. They didn't just like leave me stuck, but they were like, hey, you got to figure out what's going on under the surface. And they gave me a name. They gave me things directly for me to start taking the steps, and then met me every moment along the way when I'm like, okay, like, what do I do next? What should I do now? Like, is this working? Is this, and they just held my hand, and it was just a really long process of releasing stuff. And it was ugly. It was like the dark night of the soul. And I'm like, thank God I have the records, because I'm like, there's sometimes where I'm like, I don't know if this is the right choice, And I had a lot of fear, and the fear was a part of the cycle. And so it took me constantly facing that and having the courage, and also the trust in the process. So trust is my guide a lot, because it's where I have an issue a lot. So trust shows up as my teacher all the time. So, I was able, with their help in that moment, to break that loop and break that cycle. But I also am kind of a badass. Like, I push myself to be better, So when I noticed the cycle, I'm like, I hate this. Like, I am so sick of it. Like, as soon as I identified it as a cycle, I was like, done. Whatever I need to do. But, that's a key part of my nature, right? Like, I'm an Aries woman, and so I'm going to take things head on, and I will start whatever I need to make the change that's necessary. But, for some people it's harder. Like, they're more trapped than, maybe they don't have my enthusiasm, and so it might be harder for them to trust that the records are even real. And they're like, yeah, whatever, I'm not going to do that, So it's their own lack of maybe trust in the process, or even taking the action, because we have to make actions. So the records can tell us stuff all day, but if we don't, use the advice, like, and actually make choices that are different from that pattern that we're in, then we're just going to stay in it. And I mean, so I don't know. I don't feel like they're like enablers in the way that like you just go to pay your therapist for the rest of your life and they just tell you the same thing. But I do think that it's like with some people, it's more of a gentle, like they're like, okay, this person's actually not ready to make the change yet. So we're going to just, maybe we're just holding them in grief for a year because they're just broken and this is part of the process. So I think people heal at different rates. And like you were saying with your person, like some people identify with the disease, and that as a homeopath is an obstacle to cure. I mean, if they are so enmeshed with their disease that they don't, they get benefits from it, they get sympathy, it supports them if like financially or whatever. Even so, a lot of times they'll stop healing. They'll say, I can't do this. I'm not going to get my benefits if I don't have this disease anymore. And they'll stop. They don't want to take the remedy anymore. Like they'll get right there and they'll prevent their own healing because who are they? I mean, it's like an identity crisis that, as you start to peel that layer back and, you've said you're depressed for 20 years now, and now you identify with depression. Do you remember who you were before that depression hit? I mean, it's so hard. And that's where empathy and trying to understand, it can be challenging sometimes because you're like, but it's just right there. Like if you could just, change your lifestyle a little bit. Like if you could just.
Or, like actually keep that one person in your life that was actually good, good to you and, positive changes were happening.
Right.
Which is scary, of course, because, that is breaking the cycle and that is like not even having to remember who you were before, but like try to start imagining who you'll be without, which for someone who, I mean, literally lives off it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, to live a happy, healthy life. Oh boy, that's, but I mean, that's just, that's just me. That's where I just wish that sometimes, a little nudge in the right direction, but it's more of a human thing, I guess, to want that.
Yeah.
But so the records, you mentioned they exist like everywhere. I mean, like now I'm also part of another podcast across the pond, and one of our hosts is like really going into the UAP stuff now, because that gets me thinking, if it's like multidimensional and like literally everywhere in space and time, there are living beings within the records. There must be some interesting beings living in there, and it makes me wonder, like, could we like get to know those beings like through the records, perhaps? Like, is that the wormhole that we're constantly looking for?
I mean, you can literally ask them anything because everything's stored within there. So, and with about beings, I mean, I've asked about, different traditions, like with the Norse tradition. I had this lifetime that showed up just randomly. They're like, and they brought up like the elves or whatever. And I just wrote it down and I moved on. And like a year later, I was like, I never asked them about the elves. And so I went in and I explored that. And it was actually when I started looking at the tree of Yggdrasil. And I was like, okay, there's children of the mist. So one time they were like, you had this lifetime where you were of the mist and like there was like heat and steam. And it was such a weird, like, it didn't feel like a tangible lifetime. It felt like, something so non-physical. And I just, whatever. But then I'm looking at Yggdrasil and they're like children of the mist. And I was like, oh. And then like with the elves, the realm of, I'm probably going to say it wrong, but Alfheim.
Yeah.
So when I asked about this elf lifetime, they had made this connection to Venus and all of this light. They were like, there's this connection to the light, like they live off the light. And they said, but there's different types of elves in different realms. Yes, and then I was like, well, there's the dark elves. So like in all of these cultures, I do think like the shamans of every culture, they're in the records and they are seeing it. Now their cultural lens tints it a little bit, right? Because that's how they perceive the world.
Yeah.
So, they call it Alfheim, and, my records are like, well, this is your Venusian lifetime, but they're like, it actually does parallel. And that's the word they gave it. But it's actually a similar, like they were seeing it correctly when they were documenting their mystical experiences. And so, I have been able to explore more, and it usually comes about through synchronicity. And I'll be like, I got to ask about that, because I'm just really curious. And so I've been able to connect with certain deities and ask about them and, learn about them, have more of a deeper relationship with certain beings because of the records, and especially things that are lost to time,
Yeah.
And it's just not been very well documented. Well, I love to go ask questions about that because that's where it gets, it's far out. Like, it's hard to share some of that stuff because I know people are like, oh, wow, she's crazy. But I'm like, it's in the records, it's not like, this isn't me. I just happened to stumble upon it, But a lot of the stuff that even feels weird at the time, and this is what I mean also about living, because we start to live our lives and what we learned that seemed vague actually isn't. And then I'll be reading some book about another culture and they're talking about dragons in like a certain way. And I'm like, this is what they meant. Like this culture has this documented. This is what I saw, but it didn't make any sense because I live, in America, and like we don't talk about dragons, and like, so I'm having to like figure it out. But, I kind of I take what they say, and I sit with it. I'm not like, oh, this is a fact and I have to now live my whole life like as the dragon girl. But I'm just like, okay, there's dragons. Let's just sit with that. And then, I'll explore it more, and then I'll start to see it in my outer world of like, this ancient culture had this exact same belief, and this is what they were seeing in that, non-physical dimension, right? So you can ask about all sorts of stuff. I love asking about myths and the beings that show up in myths, and just observing like other cultures and how they kind of are crossing, like, oh, they call it this, but we call it this. But it's actually in essence very similar. But, that's just kind of how my mind is working. Like I'm a poet, I'm an astrologer. I love studying mythology, but not just from one culture. So like to me, my records take me there, and they're like, okay, she digs this. We're gonna blow her mind today. She's not gonna think it's weird if we say that she's an elf. It's fine.
Yeah. If anything, you're going to be like, tell me more.
Right. Absolutely. And I don't go around like, just if I learn about a parallel life or I learn about something like that seems really far out, it doesn't necessarily change the course of my identity on earth. I'm still astral. Like I'm a mother, I'm an artist. I'm a very grounded person, but it is nice to know about just the multifacetedness of reality and how these things that appear to be, just imagination, well, there's actually some logic to them. It's just, you have to understand it with an open mind. And I do think our ancestors, had more of that intuitive sense of things. And so they didn't just say, oh, well, that's illogical, we're going to throw that out. They were like, well, let's write about it in poetry and like, let's sing about it. Let's like on it for a while.
Yeah.
Instead of just, oh, well, that's, I don't see fairies, so they can't be real, who cares? Like, it's just, there is that essence that's there. And like a lot of these beings exist in so many cultures, just given different names. And I think there's what's real to the third dimension is, like it's not specific to just here. Like the elf lifetime, they were very clear it was fifth dimensional. So even though they said there's a physical aspect to that, the elves, like they do kind of eat, but they mostly absorb the light from the sun. And, they might meditate for 100 years, like, and they still have enough water. Like the way they were describing, like certain things, I was like, well, that's interesting. So there was a physical aspect, but they were like, because you're in the third dimension, it's more challenging for you to process that because it's fifth dimensional. And so it's just a different reality. But then I love things like looking at Yggdrasil, which has these different dimensions basically within it. And so it's like, oh, well, there's room for that. We're just like in Middle Earth here, so it's hard for us to understand because that's just not where our consciousness is. But when we're in the records and we're sort of blending our consciousness with the records, right? And we're merging, we're able to see beyond that third dimensional perception, if that's what we're seeking. If the, you got to want that,
True,
if
true.
you're just asking about like how can you stop your dog's diabetes or something, you're not going to go to Alfheim, So not everybody has these far out experiences with the records. So
Yeah.
I don't want someone to feel like they go in and they just get a little bit of information that they're not in there. I've spent a lot of time developing my relationship, which is why I feel so comfortable talking about it and having the experiences and not like limiting them and saying, well, that's weird, I don't want to go there. That's just not how I am as a person. So
Yeah. So I guess final question. I'm curious about this. Like you kind of named it already, Middle Earth. My mind immediately goes to Tolkien, and my mind is like when we're talking about archetypes, my mind is just always, I fucking love it. It's like also like always going back to Carl Jung. Do you believe that many of those great writers like Tolkien or philosophers like Jung, were they like, well, tapped into, to use a more pop culture term, tapped into the Akashic Records? Because like, especially the world building of Tolkien, I mean, like he already like said that he based it of, a lot of ancient cultures, but it's so absolutely amazing. And then the teachings of Carl Jung with the collective consciousness, the archetypes and all of that. I mean, like you were mentioning it already, like archetypes as, teachers or masters or, whoever. Did they, like, were they, well, tapped in, if you will, I guess, to add that for us common folk? Can we do that as well?
So I think it's interesting you asked about Tolkien, because before I started reading the records myself, my mentor, I would go have readings done. One day I asked, I was like, was Tolkien channeling like a different time on Earth that we've forgotten? And she was like, that's such an interesting question. But it's interesting because we talk about Tartaria, and there was a connection with Tolkien channeling like these lost civilizations. But I don't know if he knew. And this is what I'm saying. Like some people are going into the records unconsciously. And I think when Tolkien was in that flow and he was just writing and his logical mind was not distracting him. And he was just, I do think he was probably channeling or, sensing something in the field, and he was documenting it. But, when I went to Tartaria, like through a mystical meditation, and I was looking, it was like the cobblestone. It was like the way the structures were. That's what made me I'm like, this looks a little bit like some of the towns with Lord of the Rings, and it made me think. I think he was. I don't think he was just making it up. I mean, some of it's his own imagination, his interpretation, but I do think he was channeling something. And I think it's interesting with the elves, right? Because I just asked. This is something recently I was exploring, and they said that there was a time when elves did live here and they helped humanity get to sort of a certain level, and then they retreated back, right, into that fifth dimension. Like it was no longer necessary for them to be here physically. And it made me think about in Lord of the Rings how the elves are kind of like working with,
with mankind,
the human, mankind.
Yeah.
I'm like, they don't say humans, but
no, yeah, mankind, yeah.
right,
with
to a
the
certain
great
point.
battles against the great evil, and then
Yes.
once the great evil is has been defeated, they retreat back in the woods of Lothlorien, which you can imagine indeed as going back into their own space, their own dimension, if you will.
Right. And I even thought about like how they were saying, well, there's different types of elves and the dark elves that show up. Well, that made me think of the orcs, because they're kind of, they come from the elves, but they've been distorted, and so I'm like, this is so, like, I do think Tolkien was channeling it. I do think that these stories are just available. And I think when people are writing fiction and they're in that creative space, that they are picking up on those impressions. Now, how they choose to define them is up to them. That's your own creative process. But, also with Jung, he was a mystic. I think he knew, but I also think he was guarded a little bit and wanted to stay logical because he didn't want it to distract from the importance of his work.
Yeah.
But I do think that when he was talking about archetypes and personality types and, you know, the collective unconscious. You know, you could absolutely look at the collective unconscious as an aspect of the Akashic Records, right? It's a dimension of where all of our memories are stored. And when you're in that space, you might tune into other stories that exist, you know, with or without you, and channel all sorts of stuff. And that's where, like, when I'm writing poetry or I have my records open and I'm just like, I'm using words, I'm saying stuff, I'm like, what the hell? And then I go look it up and it's some myth, you know? And so I'm like, it is in the collective. And when I was writing, I'm like, okay, how would I describe that? Then this word comes forward and it's some mythical deity. And like they embody what I was trying to get at, but they were like, well, you could use this name. You know, this is a name that actually summarizes this thing that you're feeling. And I think that feels like the collective unconscious. So I think he was definitely tuned into it. Do I think everybody can do it? I do. I actually think that it's so natural for us that we do it unconsciously a lot, especially when we're in a state of inner peace and we're just really like relaxed and we have an intention. So this is an interesting kind of, I wouldn't say experiment because I didn't know what was happening till later, but I had done an astrology reading for this woman. And right at the end, she said, you know, could we open my records about this thing? And I was like, oh, you know, I'm so tired. I was like, it was like a 3-hour astrology reading. So I was like, how about this? You know, you go home and tomorrow I'll open your records and we'll ask that question when I'm feeling more grounded. Well, she went home and she left her question with me. It was something about her health. Okay. She went home and meditated. She didn't know, like, she wasn't using the Akashic Records prayer or anything. She just went into meditation and she said the same question that she gave me. And they told her that what she was experiencing was the result of an environmental toxin. They said that the homeopathic remedy was arsenicum and how often to dose it. Well, she didn't tell me that. So I went into her records the next day and they were like, environmental toxin, arsenicum's the best match. And like when I told her that, I was like, that is so like specifically the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And she didn't have the prayer. She just went into a relaxed state and consciously was seeking an answer to a question, and she found it. And I do think, you know, there's different prayers that have been channeled. The one that I used was passed down from the Mayan culture and translated into English, and it works really well for me. So that's the one I stick with. But, you know, I think people might even be able to come up with their own as long as the intention's there and, you know, their heart is in it. I think working with one that other people have already kind of got really comfortable with, like in the beginning, it's really nice to get used to the field, what it feels like to be in there. But I've taught a lot of people at this point to go into the records, and some of them, like I have one friend and she really struggles with like her imagination. She can't, like when she closes her eyes, she doesn't see anything. So if you're like, imagine a purple couch, she couldn't. And so I was like, how is this going to go? You know, when she's in the records, like, is she going to be able to do it? I didn't know. And she was drawing stuff. Like I was so impressed. She got an answer to every single question that she asked. And I had another person recently that was a little skeptical, you know, like whatever, which I don't judge. I don't care if people believe like, it means nothing to me if someone doesn't believe in the Akashic Records or in anything that I do. So he came in with his wife and he went into the records and I was like, okay, like, what's the bodily sensation? And everybody wrote it out. And his sensation was almost verbatim what I was feeling, which is just this floaty, you know, if you open it and just sit there, what do you feel? I'm like, he's definitely in, you know, he's definitely in. He was getting answers, but his logical mind was like, this just can't be right. The whole time, he's like, this can't be right. Like, but I do have some exercises where we kind of test, like, what's your intuition say? I put a painting up and I say, you know, spend 10 minutes writing everything that comes to you intuitively about this painting. And then we open the Akashic Records or their Akashic Records. And I say, now ask your records, what is this painting saying? What am I to learn from this painting? What am I, you know, and it's just these amazing stories that come forward and they start rhyming, or, you know, some people rhyme, not everybody, but it's just, they'll read their original intuitive response and then they'll read what they wrote with the records. And it's just, everyone's like, oh my gosh, I don't use those words. Like, that's not how I would have described it. And, you know, sometimes it's interesting as a group, you know, there was a painting and everyone was like, I think this was Atlantis. And I'm like, where are they getting that from? But like, the group was identifying the imagery with the flood and specifically the Atlantean timeline. And I was like, you guys are blowing my mind right now, because when I picked this painting just randomly, I wasn't thinking about that at all, you know? And so I do think anyone can do it. It's just a matter of sticking with it long enough and like building trust, because trust is not something, and I would not suggest someone just trust somebody. Trust is a big issue for me. I like sit with it, you know, like have the experience. And then over time, you're going to trust it a little more and more, like any relationship. Like, well, when I did this, it actually worked out really well. I felt very confident and you know, and like allow the trust to grow and build the relationship. And if you do that, like you will get more confident and it will feel, I think, more beneficial as far as like taking their guidance more seriously. But I do think everybody can do it. I think some people just have this challenge of believing that they have this kind of right to do it, or like that they're, you know, like they think that maybe it's just reserved for like priests or shamans or mystics, and like that maybe they're not worthy. And so that's actually the biggest block. It's just to help people feel more confident in their own skills to know things. So, and they don't need to go, you know, necessarily ask a priest for everything. Like the answers are right here. And like that's, to some people, that's really challenging. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, as I mentioned before, as for a lot of people, I think that's also just the dogmatic backgrounds, you know, that they are told that, you know, mostly he is the one who can speak for or on behalf of. So yeah, I can imagine it being hard for a lot of people. And the painting, that's the whole group, you know, feeling it like it's, that's Atlantis. I mean, that's just another amazing example of the, you know, the collective unconsciousness or collective consciousness. Like just all of them's like, that's Atlantis. It's like, okay.
Right. I mean, I was like, that's really cool, guys. When I picked this painting, I like, you know, consciously didn't think of it like this at all. But now that you're saying it, then, but they were all tuned in. I think maybe as a group, like they tapped in together into that collective unconsciousness, and we're seeing something quite similar, but they're in their own personal record. So the words that they use are different because their guides are going to be different and unique to them. So, you know, some people might hyperfixate on a particular part of the painting, where this other person's guides were like taking them more to story building. And I just love that, because it's like, we're also creative. We're also unique. Even our records, you know, they have a certain language that they speak to us in, and a different way. The way that we experience it is so unique individually. So we can't even really compare ourselves to the person next to us, because, you know, some of my students will be, you know, seeing a lot of pictures, and then some people, they have to write it. Like that's how they feel the information is through the written word. And so, you know, I'm like, don't compare yourself just because you're not seeing pictures. Like this is builds up over time. Like the more you're in there, the more I think that some of those sensory sensitivities kind of open up a little bit more, where you're like, oh, I'm smelling something like that's not here, or sometimes I'll actually hear in an accent, you know, like information. If I'm writing, I always get information. Like the written word is like almost anybody can do that. But depending on the insight, it comes through different senses. You know, if I need to see it, I will see it versus hear it. Sometimes I'll just feel it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for this amazing ride, amazing journey. I mean, it's a lot to process, but I mean, I asked for it, so I've been granted it. I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew how grand the topic was gonna be, but I definitely feel like I've learned a lot. I have learned better as well. The Akashic Records is just indeed this grand thing, and that we should really all try and tap into it more often. So yeah, thank you very much. Where may the good people find you?
So I have a website, astralmeadow.com, where you can find my podcast, all the classes that I'm teaching, book readings with me. So pretty much that's a great landing spot. On my Instagram, I'm Astral Meadows with an S because Astral Meadow was taken. YouTube, Astral Meadow 369. My podcast is available on all streaming platforms. And for that, we do talk about holistic health, all the esoteric wisdom, and just a lot of different types of spiritual information. So if you like those kind of topics, then it will be good for you to check it.
Awesome. Well, I'll of course make sure that all the links, all the relevant links are in the description box down below. I always want to make sure that my guests are well represented as well, because I mean it is on guests like yourself that I have built my podcast, that I built my platform. Thought it'd just be fair. And for everyone watching, for everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us once again. Do leave a like. Please leave something nice in the comments, or just, leave something in the comments. It doesn't have to be nice, but, do mind. I do answer. So your word. Share this with everyone. I mean, especially topics like this, when it's just so, out there, literally and figuratively. I mean, this is just stuff that everyone has to know or should know. Make sure to subscribe to the channel as well, and do ring the notification bell to get notified whenever I upload something new, whenever I go live again with Zaralath, which I do hope I will be later tonight at time of recording, of course. Just to make sure that you get all the notifications, because I have heard from people that YouTube has a tendency to not put out the notification. They'll love the bigger platforms as a very niche creator. And for more on the Greater Pagans Tribe, the Greater Pagans and Greater Pagans podcast, do go to our website, www.greaterpagans.com, where you can find all the information on what we do, what are we about, what we are working towards, our merchandise, all the good people and tribes that we associate ourselves with. And if you feel like supporting us a little more, just a little more, do go to our Patreon, patreon.com/greaterpagans. Pick a tier of your choosing. I have 3 tiers. Do I know them from the top of my head? I should. It's the Freeman tier, which is just, basic stuff, but always appreciate it. Warrior Aristocrat, where you can get early access to all the podcasts and bonus content, and then the Esoteric Book Club, the Greater Pagans Book Club, which I will continue. It's just life is chaotic at the moment, where we are currently still reading Night Side of the Runes, which is a very fascinating book. And I am saving everything for the Esoteric Book Club, even though I really want to read more. So thank you all so much. Until next time, have a good day, good evening, good night, whatever it may be to you. And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye. This was yet another amazing episode of the Greyhorn Pagans podcast. We thank you all for watching. We thank you all for listening. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you will be notified whenever we upload something new. Support us on Patreon for early access, and for everything else that we do with the tribe, for everything else that we do with the podcast. Find us on www.greaterpagans.com. For now, we thank you, and until next time.